So we're a software development company, Condrey Corporation. We're based out of Greenville, South Carolina, and we focus exclusively on identity-driven, policy-based storage management and access. We have customers across, all verticals worldwide. We are a Novell engineering partner. We develop two products that make up the Novell File Management Suite, Novell Storage Manager that I'm covering today, as well as Novell File Reporter. We also develop products that integrate with Novell eDirectory, and one of those products is Kanaka for Macintosh. There's for eDirectory connectivity for Mac OS X, and we also have an Active Directory version. And we like to consider ourselves a kind of a pioneer and leader in the identity-driven, policy-based storage solution space. So just a quick shameless plug here before I get into Storage Manager. Kanaka for Macintosh, it provides both a plug-in and a client. So if you have Macs on your network, it allows you to do single sign-on into your Novell eDirectory using your Novell eDirectory password. Once you log in using your identity, Kanaka then mounts the storage based on what that user has access to, either user as well as group storage. We shipped in May 2010 support for Snow Leopard, the new client, updated plug-in. December of last year, we delivered the Kanaka engine on the OES2 Linux platform. And then just in May, we just shipped version 2.5, which provides support for OS X Lion, as well as we added a new product for accessing Active Directory storage. So if you got any questions on that, feel free later. You can email me, and I'll be glad to provide you more information. So let's get into Novell Storage Manager 3.02. So for those that aren't familiar with it, I like to kind of set it up this way. You've got your Novell storage infrastructure or your Microsoft infrastructure where your data is being stored for your users. You then got your directory service. You have either Microsoft Active Directory that you're running, or hopefully you're running Novell eDirectory. So what Novell Storage Manager does is it really bridges a gap, provides that connectivity between the directory service and the file system itself. So based on events from Active Directory, create, move, delete, or eDirectory, we'll process those events, read the policy, and provision, automate moves, deletes, renames, everything based on those events coming from the respective directory service. So we refer to it as identity-based storage management, and I get this question a lot, does it require like Novell IDM? And the answer is no. Whatever process you're currently using to create and manage your users and groups in the directory, we can plug right into that. So if you created a user in this example, then Storage Manager will automatically go out and provision the different pieces of storage relevant for that user based on their role. Now, home folders, auxiliary, and collaborative are both across the eDirectory and Active Directory platforms. And if you have Microsoft Active Directory Windows, then we added the ability to manage profile paths and terminal services or remote desktop services paths. So for each path that we're managing, you can provision role-based data, which is copy in some files, predetermined into that storage area, such as file templates, etc. We set and manage the rights so that they're always consistent, okay, based on your policy. We manage quota throughout the life cycle for both platforms. Renames, rename a user in the directory. We rename that folder, and we update the attribute. Automate transfers. So if you're an organization that has a lot of locations that you're having to move people around, that's a manual process of moving their data and then updating attributes. We automate that. As I mentioned, updating the attributes. We also include the ability to run reports for things like trustee analysis, file type analysis, anomaly report to report on orphan home directories, and so forth. Now, included in both platforms is the ability to do file grooming. So if I wanted to groom based on file type, size, or even move files that haven't been accessed or modified based on a certain time criteria. Now, everything I'm talking about so far is kind of managing it through the creation, provisioning, and then kind of through the life cycle as long as the user is still employed on the network. Now, if someone gets disabled, then you could have a policy that, and I call it the inactive user policy. You don't delete the object from the directory, so you can move them to inactive, and Storage Manager policy can automatically move that data off to another location, such as a vault, and then you can also set the policy to remove their rights, even though they still exist in the network itself. And then lastly, what happens when you delete the user? Well, when you delete that object, we see that as the delete event. Based on your company policies and rules, you can include them in the network policy with Storage Manager to determine what needs to happen. So you can clean it up, wait a number of days, or it may be the case where this is critical data that needs to be vaulted permanently, so you can move it out to the vault location. Now, I mentioned the ability to tie this in with identity management. So we have a lot of companies that are running, hopefully Novell Identity Manager, but if they're running another solution, that's fine. What you can do then is we'll plug right into that existing solution for identity management, so you add another layer of managing your identity. You add the file system identity component into your identity management solution, which is very powerful. So for the provisioning and ongoing management based on, role changes in HR can drive things to occur in the file system with NSM policies. And then obviously whenever someone gets deleted or terminated, then we can also determine based on the policy what occurs to those files. Very powerful solution. So managing collaborative storage, with policies, one of the examples I used was for an architectural firm that implemented project-based storage. So every time a new project came up, they created a group, and Storage Manager automatically provisioned the files and everything needed for the manager as well as each team member. So in this example, I have a policy on the project container. If I create a group called, let's say, Research and Development, Storage Manager, based on this policy, can set this storage area up. You add that we're monitoring for the manager and owner attributes depending on the platform, and then we add the owner in as the manager to have all rights to manage this area. Each team member gets a folder with different rights based on what you want the policy, how you want the policy to be set. For example, they may not have rights to go in and delete things out of the approved documents area. Now, you can provide ongoing grooming on this particular type of group storage, and you can also do your departmental storage and set it up based on policy so you can manage quotas as well as grooming rules on it. Now, I know we have some academic customers on the call today, so you take that same paradigm now, and now I can create class storage based on policies. In this example, a courses policy. So if I create a group called Accounting 101, now I can add my instructor in and then give her the right, he or she the rights to manage this class, and then I can give each student their own personal turn-in folder. As you add the students as members, we automatically create a folder based on their ID, and then you can set that up so they can turn in their folders, and this is very dynamic. And if you really take that to the next step, which a lot of customers do, and a lot of partners that are partners with Novell Storage Manager, they tie it back into the student management system to drive additional automation. Now, another thing that you can do is on each piece of since it is managed by policy, I can set file grooming rules to like move unwanted files off and so forth on this particular storage area. Now, as far as cleanup, if you have a policy in the high school and I delete all my objects, regardless of how they get deleted, then Storage Manager will clean up those files. And then this is usually the case right now for schools. They're in the process of doing this. They're cleaning up from last year, and then they're promoting their students. And Storage Manager, when you move those objects, will move their data and clean it up from the source, making room for the next class to come in. This is a screenshot of the grooming rules. You can really set grooming rules based on file type. You can set it based on size, create, modify times, and you can schedule these groom operations to occur, nightly or based on a specified time frame. Now, one of the things that we provide for both the Active Directory and eDirectory platform is something known as auxiliary policies. Now, we had a lot of customers that asked for or needed the ability that when you created a user to create additional storage space for that user that's managed for a different application. So one of the things that we did is we set a policy up that called an auxiliary policy that links to the primary policy. So when I create a user, these auxiliary policies take effect. But the key thing here is that there are independent and separate policy rules that apply, such as rights, quota, what happens whenever the user is deleted or disabled. And it's completely automated because it's tied to those events on that user throughout the life cycle. Now, probably the use cases and what customers are using this for now, the first one is a separate folder that's managed by the IT department that the users do not have access to, but these files stored in this folder need to stay with the user as they're moved. An example of that is email files. We have several customers that are storing certain email files that if they're stored in the home directory itself, they'll delete them. We have customers using it to create an HR folder. So if you create a user, HR gets a folder created to manage that user for their expenses, leave requests, and so forth. But the individual users have no right to that HR folder. And when the user is deleted, that folder is archived as a permanent record. And then for schools, it's a separate portfolio folder that students can't delete things out of. So the way this really works is, in this example, I've got Bob, and I've created Bob, and he got his home directory based on my policy. So then I went in, you go in and create an HR auxiliary policy. So Bob, there's a folder created for Bob under the HR share, in this example, that user Bob has no rights to, only the HR department. And then I also have another one set up for the AppSalts policy where there's a folder that gets created for managing certain files, such as INI files, that need to stay with Bob. So in this example, if I delete Bob, I can clean up the home directory, vault the HR folder, and maybe the IT department folder gets cleaned up as well. So separate rules apply to what occurs. Now, quota management, both for eDirectory and Active Directory customers. This is a screenshot of the policy. In this example, I'm setting an initial quota of 100 meg, and I'm providing a help desk person to log into a web interface and increase that up to a maximum of 500 meg in 25 meg increments. And I've specified who's able to do that. You have to be a member of, in this example, NSM Quota Managers or ERIC are the only people that can manage the quota through the web interface. Now, whenever you access the web interface, you'll get a list of all the users that you can manage quota for, either their home directories, their auxiliary storage, or their collaborative storage that you're managing. In this example, if I selected Lauren Timmons, then I can double-click on this row and see that it's getting low, and you can have the ability to perform an analysis. So if Lauren was storing MP3 files, a file that shouldn't be stored, then you may not want to increase the quota. You might want to give Lauren a call. Now, if it is approved, you can just simply add the 25, which is based on the policy setting, up to the policy-defined maximum of 500 meg. This is a very popular feature, especially for customers that are struggling with how do you manage quota. It's very difficult sometimes to even start the process of setting quotas on for managing your users. This allows a better interface and a better way to enable you to do that. Reporting, there are several reports that you can run, the first of which is a trustee analysis report. Now, with this report, we look at you can select any folder or a file, And when we run that report, you will get anyone and everyone who has rights, regardless of how they obtain those rights. This is being run against an Active Directory environment, so I can see that who has rights and everyone who has rights to the active employees folder under HR. And I can save this either as a CSV file from an auditing standpoint or an HTML. You also, in eDirectory, will tell you, in eDirectory you can have rights assigned to containers and basically any type object. So we had one customer that ran this, and they had someone that had supervisor rights to a file system area folder because they were security equivalent to a printer object that had supervisor rights to that server. So there's a lot of different ways people can get rights, and sometimes it's very difficult to figure out how those rights were, how the users actually got those rights. So this is a very good report you can run. This is an example of exporting this out into a CSV file that I pulled into Excel that you can use as a report on a particular folder. Very, very useful for auditing. File type analysis report, I can browse down through the path analysis component through the management interface, select any folder, and then either the share or the volume in eDirectory, and then report on the file types and save this out as well. You can use this. This is useful in determining if you want to set certain grooming rules up for moving certain file types off to another location. Global statistics report. This is one that we had a large request for that went into our, I believe, our 3.0 release, is the ability to search your network, all your servers and all your users, and look for orphaned, in this example, orphaned home directories. So where the user's been deleted but their folder still exists out on the network. So by doing that, I can see in this example that B. Gibson, okay, this path, the user object no longer exists in eDirectory, but there's a folder by the name of B. Gibson out in this path. Same thing for K. Riley and O. Glover all the way down. So that can help you identify some areas that can be cleaned up. Now, you should note that once you get Storage Manager deployed, we're managing that and taking that manual management out of the process. So based on your cleanup rules, these orphan home directories won't occur anymore because you have policies that are taking action real time based on whatever your policy rules are for your company. This is an example where you can save this out to a HTML file. This report shows my different areas that, based on the policies that I'm managing, so I can get a very good, quick view of my free space for all the different storage locations that are being managed based on the policies that are configured. Here I have home folder policies, an inactive users policy, projects, courses, my HR auxiliary policy, profile path policies, etc. Global statistics. Now, once you start getting everything within your organization managed and start bringing everything into policy-based management, you can begin to see what your distribution of that is and your percentage of managed versus not managed, as well as quota commitments as well. So, for those familiar with Storage Manager, it's been around since, I think, 2003 in the early days. We went through, obviously, version 1 to 2.0, and then the 2.5. Up through last September, it was version 2.5. And there was a NSM 2.5 for eDirectory and Active Directory. Well, since last summer, we've released three major releases and updates. So in September of last year, we shipped NSM 3.0. Now, the big thing for, big feature for our Novell eDirectory customers was the removing the NetWare dependency. So you no longer have to have NetWare. The engine would now run directly on an OES Linux server. And then our second goal for that release was to get feature parity for our Active Directory customers running and managing their Windows NTFS file systems. So up until then, we only managed the home directories, no auxiliary storage, collaborative storage, as well as a lot of the grooming and all of those things we couldn't get those in the 2.5 release. So that was a major undertaking to get feature parity with Active Directory. Now, in July, okay, of this year, we just shipped version 3.02. We added the Action Object Interface. The Action Object Interface, for those that are familiar with it, it was included in 2.5, but it did not make the 3.0 release. So we've actually provided an update out to those customers before now that were upgrading from 2.5, but it officially shipped in the with the EDIR version in July of this year, and I'll cover that in just a second. For another thing we added was the support for DFS namespace for Windows, as well as the cross-empire data migration feature. So let's drill down and look at the action object and then the cross-empire. Now, for eDirectory customers, and this is not available on AD yet, we found that there were a lot of use cases where people wanted to do things that NSM policies really out of the box weren't able to do. Now, there's a lot that we do around user and auxiliary, and we've tried, but there's always something somebody needs that, and we couldn't possibly do policies for everything. So what it does is allow you to work with those events and objects that are not connected to the policies. And probably the biggest example and the biggest use we've had for it is the ability to set approval processes into workflow and tie it in with things like IDM and to provide exception-based access from a security standpoint to different storage locations. So probably the best example is, and I'll just kind of walk you through it, if I created Bob and I added him to the marketing group, then Storage Manager automatically, based on that policy, can add him into the marketing share and set his rights. Okay? He's a member of marketing, not a problem. But what if Bob needs access to some customer data in sales, and if you add him to sales, that's going to be too much rights. So he just needs access to one folder within the sales department location. So what he can do through IDM, actually make a request, okay, and through workflow entitlement in the user app, that manager would go in and say, okay, I'm approving Bob to have access to this one folder for accessing this customer list. So what will happen is he'll fill out the information in the form. Okay, the operation would be set trustee. That's the operation for that we're going to take act on. The folder path, the path attribute, and by the way, we extend the schema for this action object schema with the different attributes of the schema extension. Now, I've got my path, which is where he's requesting access, and then the manager is going to say, I'm going to approve read file scan access. The target is Bob, who made the request. Now, when he submits this form, it will set the trigger attribute on the action object to ready. The NSM Event Monitor is monitoring for that. As soon as it sees it, it will go out and provision read and file scan access to that secure sales department folder. Okay? Then once that's complete, the action object provides a status back to, in this case, IDM, so that IDM can notify the user that access. So this can be a way from a security standpoint of completely managing and auditing who has exception-based access to certain areas of critical data. This shows kind of the architecture. You don't have to use IDM. I can create action objects through LDIF files. I can use iManager, which is in the training you use iManager to do it. Or I can create these objects using Identity Manager in my last example. Now, when these objects come in, our Event Monitor, as I mentioned, is monitoring for that. The engine, then based on the action that's being queued up, could do a trustee assignment, quota management. It could even be set to do a file copy from one location to another. Now I'm going to switch from our eDirectory 3.02 update to probably the major feature that we added in 302 for Active Directory, which is the cross-empire data migration. Now, this is a new feature in NSM-AD that automates the movement of data to Active Directory-based storage environments. So, people have made that decision. If you made that decision to move from, NetWare to Windows, okay, then we want you to be able to manage your files using Novell Storage Manager. Now, there's a lot of, applications like ZimWorks, Identity Manager, Novell Storage Manager that work in the Windows environment. So this is a way of customers being able to use Novell Storage Manager to migrate their data, okay. They're maintained as a Novell customer because now we're not only helping them move, but you're able to better manage your files on Windows using Storage Manager. So it's an open architecture. We'll support movement of data from multiple source types in the future, such as domains, and we move the data quickly based on a variety of scenarios, and move the data from multiple objects, such as users and groups, to the target location. And then this last bullet is we preserve the file system metadata, i.e. timestamps. You can have the option to maintain your quota assignments during the migration owner, as well as security assignments during the move process. So the real paradigm behind this is, if you've made that move, which, we hope, you stay on Novell eDirectory in NSS, but if you do make that move to Windows, then you're not just migrating the data, you're moving to a managed storage environment, because now you have policies governing what happens throughout the life cycle. Okay, and then you can use a phased approach, reorganize and restructure, and then our security for these migrations are managed through either security transforms or policies, and it's wizard-based. This just shows the high-level architecture showing, I brought up Novell Storage Manager in my Windows domain, and I've got policies that are managing my shares and NAS devices, and I have the ability to pull that data and then transform the rights for Windows during the migration. And in the future, we'll be adding, and we've already had this request, the domain-to-domain for, in particular for acquisitions that occur for organizations. Now, from a technical standpoint, let's take a look at the components, because now that we have feature parity, it was very difficult, over a year ago for me to present, because I had to present, one architecture for eDirectory and another one for AD because things weren't exactly matched up. So now we've added the collaborative storage management rules for both platforms, personal storage for profile paths and user storage, and you can associate a policy to a container, a group, or down to the user object itself. So whenever you install Novell Storage Manager, there's an LDAP event monitor, an event monitor that's running that's monitoring for the respective directory service, whether that be eDirectory or Active Directory. And the events that we're monitoring for with the event monitor are create user, move user, rename user, create a group, add and remove members from groups, add and remove the manager if it's AD, or the owner if it's eDirectory from the group, delete user, delete group. So these are the events that we care about that manage the file throughout the life cycle. Now, when that event comes in, the engine reads that event and processes it. And part of the processing is to read the policy associated with this particular object, whether it be a user or a group. So the policy could be a collaborative, user, auxiliary, profile path. Then once it reads that policy, it determines what action needs to be taken. Now, the engine can do some of the work on its own. It's, like provisioning the folders, the auxiliary storage, collaborative, assigning rights, ownership, quota, the renames, set and update the profile property, clean up the folder. Anything that involves a copy operation, you get delegated out to the agent component, okay, and then the agent component can take care of, especially in where you have remote sites, server-to-server file copies, so it doesn't have to go back through the central office, for example, through the engine, vaulting of home folders and collaborative storage, as well as file template copies. So with that, I'm going to switch over. I think that provides a good overview of what we've done and what the product provides, as well as the new features. So I'm going to switch over, and we're going to take a look at Novell Storage Manager. This is the Active Directory platform demo that I'm running today. The same management interface is used for both eDirectory and Active Directory. So I'm going to log into NSM Admin. And let's take a look at some of the policies that I was just talking about for user and auxiliary and collaborative policies. As soon as my VM wakes up. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at some of the policies we have set up. Now, if you look under Manage Policies, you'll notice that I have the ability to create user, home folders, profile paths, remote desktop, group policies, container, as well as auxiliary. Now, in the AD version, eDirectory version, the profile paths are not available as an option, obviously. So if we look at the Atlanta user's primary, this is a home directory policy. And this policy is associated with the employee's container in Atlanta. I have an HR auxiliary policy linked to this Atlanta policy. So when I create a user, it's also going to create a folder for HR to manage that user. This is where I'll set the rights. So I'm going to make sure full control is not turned on. I'm going to override the path owner. This was added for one of our financial customers when we shipped 3.0 because the owner in Active Directory can rename and delete the folder if they are assigned as the owner. So we override that to keep the users from being able to manipulate their parent folder themselves. The template location here in the policy specifies what files I might want to pre-populate when I create that user, such as internet policies. And I'm setting it for the drive letter H. Now, my target paths, in my demo, I only have one policy path. Now, I can add multiple paths and do load balancing. So as I create, in this example, a home directory users, I could add another path, and it would automatically start distributing storage, provisioning storage to that path based on the either actual free space or percentage free space. Now, the NSM 302 includes storage redistribution, so I could add another path to a volume and then say redistribute and then automatically redistribute the storage across all the paths. So it wouldn't just start using it, it would actually redistribute it evenly across the new storage location. Here's my quota for my policy. In this example, I'm going to set it for 100 meg. I'll enable the Quota Manager. And in this example, I'm going to increase the quota up to 500 meg in 25 meg increments. And here are the people that can manage the quota based on this policy. Move schedule. This is so if you move a user in the directory, you may not want their files to be moved until, say, after hours. So you could set a time frame on move them at 3 in the afternoon, but then their data gets moved later, and then the next day they would be able to access it. Cleanup options, these are your deprovisioning rules. So this policy says when you delete a user, I want to move their data to the Atlanta home folder vault, wait 7 days, and automatically clean it up. So you can, based on your policy, you may say, well, just leave it where it's at and then clean it up, or move it to the vault and never delete it if it was something critical that shouldn't be. Either way, a lot of people will move it off to a vault location where someone that needs to have rights can review that prior to it automatically getting cleaned up. My grooming rules, in this example, I'm setting a rule that says groom music and video files. Now, I can also set grooming rules based on file size, based on modified time, access time as well, and creation time. Now, if we look at the other policies, I have a video team policy. So remember the the primary policy was set to 100. But I have the need for anyone that's working on a video project that's in maybe marketing, I need to be able to increase their quota up to 500 meg. So this policy is associated with a group called the Atlanta Video Team. So by default, if you create a user in Atlanta, they get 100 meg. If I then add them to this group, it will automatically increase their quota to 500 meg because groups have priority over the container. Now, my user's profile path, what I'm specifying here is that when you create a user, I want to manage their profile in Windows so that their desktop stuff not only gets provisioned, but it gets moved when they relocate and it gets cleaned up, which is a big deal as well. My inactive users policy specifies that when you get moved to the inactive users container, I want you to move their data to the vault. I also want you to remove all their rights. And then when you delete them, let's go ahead and just clean it up. We can walk through that in just a second. I also mentioned the HR auxiliary policy. Now this policy is associated and linked to both London and Atlanta. So when I create a user, their folder gets created for the HR department. But notice that the users, based on this setting, have no right to that folder. And I'm copying in some files that HR needs to manage for that user. And from a cleanup standpoint, these folders should never be deleted, so my policy says move them off to the terminated employees area, but never clean it up. So you see how I have separate rules governing the HR auxiliary versus the actual home directory for that user. And let's go ahead and, based on that, I'm going to go ahead and create a user, and I'm also going to add them to my projects group to provision them some storage within this project that's been created as well. So I'm going to launch Active Directory and computers here. And once again, we don't care what events take place, how you create the users. You can use Console 1 if you're eDirectory, or in my case, I'm using Active Directory and computers, or it could be identity management. So I'm going to create a user called Alice Baker. Now recall that this policy for Atlanta was also linked out to the auxiliary policy for HR, so I should also get an auxiliary folder as well as a profile path. Now I'm going to add Alice to one of my project groups called Dev Project 2. So I just created her, and she needs to be in that particular group and provisioned a location in there. So what's occurring, if I haven't already missed it, events come in to provision this user. So it's basically provisioning the storage, just adding the auxiliary storage for HR. Going to add them into the group based on the fact that I added them to the group just now. Looks like it's done. So let's go back and see what happened just based on that one create in Atlanta. I created a folder for A. Baker and gave A. Baker the file that he needs to be productive first day. Now if I right-click on A. Baker, based on the policy, I can make sure that the rights are always set correctly, and I also set the owner to the NFM proxy so A. Baker can't rename and delete her folder. Now, I also provisioned my profile path for A. Baker, whether it be XP or Windows 7. It depends on what workstation is being used as to where that profile gets stored, and we manage that. HR department got a folder for A. Baker. Okay, got the files needed to manage for A. Baker copied in automatically. But notice that based on the policy, only HR has rights to this. A. Baker does not. And then I added A. Baker to the development project. which if I can remember where I created that, I think it's under HQ Collaborative, Project, Dev Project 2, here's A. Baker got created a folder within this project and given the rights. And A. Cox is the manager of this group. So A. Baker has the rights, and A. Cox is set up to manage this. Now, if I rename A. Baker, that identity is stored in each one of these locations where I just created, the storage for her. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go out. I'm going to rename A. Baker to A. Jones, and we'll show you how we're processing that rename event. So I just renamed A. Baker to Alice Jones. That event will come in, and it's evaluating each one of these storage locations that's linked to Alice, renaming it to A. Jones. It looks like it's done. So now if I come down, we'll see that it's been renamed to A. Jones under the shared storage. If I go back up to my HR department, do a refresh, and rename to A. Jones here. My profile path got renamed, as well as my home directory. And if I look at the attribute itself for Alice, the profile path was updated to A. Jones, as well as the home directory path. So that's a simple, one of the most simple things we do as an event, but one that I think a lot of people identify with are the renames. Now, I have a policy also set up in London, so if I move Alice Jones to London, the London policy is going to take effect. So I'm going to move the home directory, move the profile path. The HR folder stays where it's at in HQ, because that doesn't need to move. So based on that move event, and I'm coming up on, I think, 135 here from a time standpoint, so I want to be, all right, so it's, the event just came through, setting the owner, copying the data, cleaning it up, cleans up the data from the source. So now, if I refresh in Atlanta, we'll see that A. Jones no longer exists there, profile path's been moved. Still exists in HR, but that didn't have to move. But now if I come down to the London location, we'll be able to see that A. Jones's files got moved to London. It was cleaned up from the source. Profile path got moved. And as I mentioned in my slide deck, we also make sure that that got moved to the London users share, gets updated as well, or that user won't be able to log in and the profile wouldn't work. Now the last thing that I'm going to do is, and since I'm running out of time, I'm just going to delete Alice Jones. I won't go through the inactive component. So based on my policy rules in London, the London users says, go ahead and move the home directory to the vault, clean it up 7 days later. Profile path says, I don't really care about it, just go ahead and clean it up right now. And the HR folder is set to archive it permanently. So let's switch over and see what occurred, make sure my Venice Process, just like it's still going through the process of cleaning it up. So if you're logged in or have an open file, which it looks like I am sitting on A. Jones, it won't complete the process. So okay, go ahead and force it to go through. And now, if we go and look at the vault for London, I should see that A. Jones's folder got vaulted out to the vault location. My HR folder got moved to the terminated location based on the policy, and the profile path we went ahead and cleaned it up. Find London. Profile path for A. Jones has been cleaned up. So throughout that, I've shown you how we manage those events throughout the life cycle, and you know, as far as managing the users based on the events. And then the last thing I'm going to bring up is just to show you the Quota Manager web interface. ACOX is a member of Quota Management. You log in. Oh, I'm sorry. Should have been, I believe, B. Lawson. There we go. It's in my. And everything I've shown you today works both on the eDirectory as well as the Active Directory platforms. Everything I've shown in the demo. So I can manage quotas for groups, auxiliary, remote desktops. In this case, I'm only looking at the home directories. I'm seeing that Amelia Taft is getting low, so I can click on that, perform an analysis, make a determination. You know, she's got movie files. Maybe I don't bump the quota up. If it is approved, I can add that quota up to the 500 meg. So Q, with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over for Q&A. I think we've got about 5 or 6 minutes. So go ahead and turn it over for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Perfect. Yeah, we do have quite a few, so we'll get through these here. So let's see. It says, does the file grooming use the native OES tools, or did you write your own?
Basically, we wrote our own. It's the underlying file system APIs that we're calling for the native file system to move the files.
Perfect. And then
so it's using the native, making native API calls to for NSS, you know, file copy operations or NTFS.
Okay, perfect. And to go along with that, how does a groom file look to the user in File Explorer?
A groom file, I didn't actually go through the grooming, so if we can actually do that right quick. But basically what it'll look like is it's going to get moved over to be a folder for that user's name, and that underneath that user's name, all the files. So it'll be the same, you know, as far as folder format that they had in their previous folder, that they can search down to it and see where that file got archived.
All right. And then let's see. Can we use this tool to migrate data from NetWare to Linux, OES2, and retain the rights?
Absolutely. We, especially for home directory, that's probably one of the biggest use cases we've had. If you use it for home directory migrations, we will migrate all the data, all the metadata and everything stays there. So we've had a lot of customers that have used it from NetWare to OES Linux. You can set a path up and get it managed on NetWare, change your policy path to point to OES Linux, and we'll migrate all the folders and then set the rights based on, you know, on the OES Linux server. We maintain all the rights and the metadata, and then we can clean it up from the source, just like you do on a user move that I showed you just now. Now, for group storage, you have the ability to migrate group storage. It would require that you set up a policy and associate it to that group, which you set the group home directory attribute path on that group, and you get it managed to a path. Then you can take your existing group storage and use it to move the data as well. Now, some of the things you run into there, it's not like a server-to-server, you know, same server name migration when you're dealing with group storage. Home directories are a little bit easier because it's a one-to-one relationship based on the home directory attribute. With group storage, you get into either maintaining the same server and volume, you know, name, so the application can still access it. So couple considerations there with migrating your group storage using NSM versus, you know, a server upgrade one-to-one with the new server name. And anybody that's done migrations, I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Okay. The next one is, which functionality is required on an eDirectory replica server?
eDirectory replica server, only the event monitor. You install it on a replica. What you want to do is install the NSM event monitor on a server that has a replica of all the objects you care about. So you creating users and groups. So you need to make sure that, you know, those objects exist within the replica ring on that server. A lot of customers will have, like at their central office, a replica server, so they install the event monitor there because all the objects are contained on that. In eDirectory, you can install, we recommend installing the event monitor on 2 servers, so you get some automatic redundancy built into that, because the event monitor basically consolidates the events when it sees 2 of them come in. But if there is a kind of like a glitch, then we will actually, in one event monitor, we'll pick up the event on the other one. In AD, there's only 1 event monitor per domain. So it's a little bit different from a design and planning standpoint for your events.
All right. The next one is, can the grooming rule apply to the user space in real time? E.g., if an unwanted file is downloaded, it will be removed immediately?
No. It can be scheduled, but it cannot be real time. We get that question a lot. It can be very resource intensive to monitor every location, because, you know, obviously folders can get hundreds of folders deep, and so we'd have to be monitoring basically every file space out there for that, and it can be very taxing from a memory standpoint. So we've kind of stayed away from that and went with the scheduling, but we do get that question a lot.
Okay, and then let's see. Could the database be an external database such as MS SQL?
Right now it is SQLite, and we are looking from a development standpoint at porting that out so it can be used by other SQL databases. That's actually in our roadmap from an engineering standpoint, is to expand that out to other SQL databases. The exact time frame I